Civil society organizations say they are keenly awaiting clarity from the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, on how schools will be prepared to open amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Schools have been closed for nearly 6 weeks as government battles to contain the virus. To get schools ready to operate during lockdown, precautions must be implemented. We are now joined via Skype by Equal Education and a co-head of research, Roné McFarlane, and Equal Education learner member, Liyema Saliwa. A very, very good afternoon to you both, and thank you so very much for joining us here. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so very much for joining us on SABC News.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right, let's start with you. I mean, you represent Equal Education, and of course there have been many concerns at this point about how lockdown has affected learning. What kinds of sort of new methods have been, introduced to the learners? I mean, we've seen a lot of, Teams, Skype calls and so forth for learners to catch up on learning and so forth. But what really have been the major challenges when it comes to students not physically being at school?
There have been challenges of data, for most of us, and network connectivity. Some of us don't have enough money to buy data and to be able to be online on these Zoom meetings, to be online and to work with the teachers via WhatsApp groups, because some of us, our strength doesn't only lie on online learning, it lies at the classroom. So if ever, we're given tasks online and you don't have data, you miss out on your schoolwork, which is really not a good thing for us as students.
Yeah, and I mean, what are some of, the things that you've had to battle with as a student? I mean, what are your thoughts really about the issues surrounding returning to school? I mean, are you confident about your school's ability to protect you from coronavirus? You mentioned the fact that you've had challenges, things like not having data, not necessarily having, the right equipment for you to get in touch with your teachers and so forth. But at this point, are you thinking that the school is ready and prepared to receive you and protect you from the coronavirus?
I don't think the schools are ready at all, because here in the Western Cape, right, it's one of the highest levels of the coronavirus cases. And they think that in 2 weeks they'll be able to fix everything and have everything ready for us to come back to school. It's not possible, and I'm not very confident about going back to school because I feel that our lives are at risk. We use public transport, and it's a total no from me.
Yeah. All right, Roné, let me come to you. You represent Equal Education, and, with learners not being physically at school, a lot has been affected negatively, apart from, of course, the actual learning and, of course, education as a whole. Talk to us, Roné, about some of the other challenges posed by lockdown on learners not physically being at school. I know that school feeding programs, for example, have been grossly affected. Take us through some of the other issues, please.
Yeah, that's a really important issue. As Liyema said, firstly, obviously, learners' ability to learn at home vary greatly depending on the access to resources they have. And from the feedback that we have gotten, most learners really struggle to continue learning at home. So that is definitely the first big challenge. But as you say, there are important other challenges, and access to nutrition is a really big part of that. Around 9 million learners usually get a meal at school every day. And for a big portion of those, that meal is the only meal for the day. And with lockdown now having been extended for this long and learners not being at school, there hasn't been a meaningful replacement for that program. And in addition, as we all know, many families are in worse off positions than they were before lockdown. So it's likely that even more learners now require support from the feeding scheme or from government. So that's a really important concern. And then obviously other issues are that not all learners are safe during the day, have safe environments to spend during the day. Not all learners have an adult who's able to support them while they're at home or to look after them while they're at home. And sometimes schools are points where learners access important other services, like, for instance, where vaccines get given to learners or where they have access to psychosocial support. And those are all things that, as long as schools remain closed, we're ill-prepared to provide in other ways.
Yeah. You know, I was just talking to Liyema, and I'm sure you heard the question that I posed to her about the concerns regarding sanitation. And Liyema has quite articulately told us that, look, I don't think that the school that I'm at would be able to protect me from coronavirus. So just from you, from Equal Education, I mean, there have been those concerns that are raised about sanitation, whether there's going to be, you know, there's schools that don't even have the right ablution facilities, and if schools would be adequately prepared then to receive learners whilst we're still dealing with coronavirus, whilst we're still dealing with COVID-19. What is Equal Education's view in this regard? I mean, where you have a student currently speaking to who's saying right now that I don't think I'm necessarily safe when I get back to school. What is your view then, please, Roné?
That's really important reflection from Liyema. Our sense generally has been that the department has failed to adequately demonstrate that it's able to reopen schools in a safe way, that it's ready to do that.
Yeah.
And it's been very bad at communicating those plans. We're really hoping that the minister's briefing today will address some of that uncertainty around the measures that are already in place. But it's really important that the department is able to generate some level of confidence in its ability to do that. Because as Liyema says, if learners and parents are not convinced, you will have a situation where schools will reopen but classes will be empty because learners won't want to go back to school. So as much as communicating clearly is important for public scrutiny, it's also important for the implementation of those plans. The public needs to have confidence in what the department is able to achieve.
Yeah. Liyema, let me come back to you. I mean, we've just sort of touched quite briefly on what we hope to hear from the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga's address today. I'm sure you know that she will be addressing all of us this evening, and you must be quite anxious to know what the Minister is going to say today. Liyema, what do you want to hear from the Minister as she takes to that podium today to address the nation on what the plans are going forward regarding schools?
I would like to hear from the Minister. Firstly, don't the rate of the growing infections trigger something to her? Sending us back to school isn't really one of the greatest of options. But after all, yes, I understand she wouldn't have had a perfect plan in an imperfect situation. But again, sending us to school is not the ideal and perfect plan that she would ever come up with. Couldn't she maybe put a hold on this year's academic year and maybe we should continue next year? You know, so that is one of my questions. And also, what kind of health advice did she get, and are we going to have psychosocial support when we get back to school, and how is she going to be able to deal with our transport? How are we going to get to school? Are we going to continue using these public transports, and how is social distance going to be maintained while we are more than 40 in a classroom? So those are my kind of questions, and I feel like I want her to touch on, like, within 2 weeks, what is the difference that she thinks they're going to make. Because we've been campaigning as learners for years that these schools need to be fixed. What change can she make in only 2 weeks?
Yeah.
You know, many schools have been vandalized by now. And how are they going to fix them in just a period of 2 weeks? 2 weeks is nothing for years of campaigning by us as equalizers.
Yeah. Liyema, some very good points there that you raise. You talk about, perhaps holding back the academic year. Would you be comfortable with being held back a year because of coronavirus? And at this stage, are you worried about your end-of-year results and your performance, given the fact that you've lost quite a significant chunk of your schooling, haven't you?
I would say that my life comes first. Education, yes, it is the key to success, but my life comes first. It is better to be alive than to never write at all. It's better to put a stop now and continue next year than to never get an opportunity right at all. So I feel like we should prioritize our life before our yes, books are important, but so is our lives as well.
Yeah. All right, Roné, I need you to respond to that, please, from Equal Education's point of view. I mean, you've briefly touched on what you hope to hear from the Minister this evening at 6 p.m. When she addresses us regarding, the status of school reopening. You've said that you're hoping that all the issues in terms of sanitizing are, sorted out, cleanliness. But you're hearing from a student saying, look, I'd rather, miss, school this year and be alive than to, not have a chance at all, in fact, to go back to school. How would you respond to that? I mean, these are valid concerns, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's really important and difficult perspectives that Liyema is raising. I think an important takeaway is the anxiety that people are experiencing around going back to school, both learners and parents, and the need for the department to also explain the evidence on which it's basing its decisions. But another important takeaway is this question about even if learners go back to school, how much learning will be able to take place, given the circumstances under which schools reopen, the challenges that there will be around reopening, the fact that some teachers won't be able to go back to school due to being vulnerable to COVID, the fact that classes might not be full. Those are all things that will affect how much learning can take place. And it's really important that the Minister also clarifies how they are thinking about that, what they are thinking about in terms of how to restructure the curriculum, what will be expected of learners when they come back to school, that they have realistic expectations, that we get clarity on what will happen to the school nutrition program. Will learners whose grades aren't being phased back in immediately, will they get access to food as well? Or will it only be for learners who go back to school? And then all the practicalities around what Liyema has said around social distancing in schools. What does the science say is necessary, and the evidence that the department's basing its interventions on, and what is its ability to ensure that, given the context that we know is the reality in many of our schools, overcrowded classrooms, overcrowded learner transport. Those are all things that we're looking to the Minister to answer this evening.
All right, Roné, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so very much for your input, and we hope to catch up with you after the Minister has spoken at some stage. Thank you for your time. And Liyema, of course, thank you so very much for being with us here on SABC News. Appreciate both of you this afternoon. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, that's of course Roné McFarlane from Equal Education talking to us about some of the concerns regarding schools reopening, as well as a learner, a student, Liyema Saliwa, of course, Saliwa, of course, who's also talking about some of those concerns from a learner perspective regarding what might be the reopening of the schools. Of course, we do await the Minister's address that will be this evening, and of course will be broadcast here on SABC News at 6 p.m. So do stay tuned, of course, for that. I think everybody everybody's talking about that today. Right, well, preparation